So good evening, everybody. Excuse me, this is Bob Mader, Chairman of the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'm glad to see you here. And I'm pleased to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Mike McMillin. As you can see from the slide as it goes by, he's flown all kinds of neat things from MD-80s to 7.3s for TWA and for United, and he's also flown the F-16, 3,000 hours in the F-16, and also had a couple of intercepts. Participated in a couple of those, I guess. And Mike, I've got to ask you, how did you get the nickname Alvin?
Well, you're gonna have to buy me. You're gonna have to buy me beers for that story.
Okay.
Classified.
Okay, that's Sun and we'll do that at Sun and Fun or Oshkosh. How's that? All right. Yeah. It's one of the yeah, I know those stories. All right. Well, we're very
on a webinar.
I see. All right. And Mike is also with NORAD, which is the well, I'll let you introduce NORAD here. We're going to go over that. We're kind of excited tonight because this is the first time, and I'm about to go over to his slide deck. This is the first time we've ever hosted a webinar where it says not classified, which is kind of cool. So, Mike, I'm going to go over to your slide deck, and for everybody, normally we turn this over to the presenter. However, Mike is in sunny Puerto Rico tonight, doing this from his iPad, so I have his presentation. So we're doing it a little bit old school. You'll be hearing him prompt me to go to the next slide or wherever we need to go. So, Mike, I'm going to go over to yours and let you start driving.
All righty. Well, you go to the next slide. Like Bob said, it's unclassified, and I don't know if any of you have ever been in the military, but when you do get to the classified stuff, it's the most boring stuff you've ever seen. It's all on CNN. It's just the source that makes it classified 99.9% of the time. So nothing earth-shattering is going to be in the brief, or I won't talk to any classified stuff, but if I did, you'd be sorely disappointed. All right, you can go to the next slide.
There we go.
All right, so that's me. Bob already kind of introduced me, and that's kind of what I do. That's my life.
Yeah, I asked Mike for a self-portrait, and this is what I got. He, you know, and of all the airplanes on this, I got to tell you, the one that makes me the most nostalgic is the 7.2.
Yeah, that's my favorite big airplane of that I've ever flown. That thing is, I wish they were still in the fleet. And all of those airplanes are much better looking than I am, so you're getting a treat tonight. All right, so here's basically what our brief is about. You know, most pilots, they, you know, got their plane in their hangar and the tanks are full of gas because they don't want to get water in there from the condensation. So they just walk out. It's a beautiful day, so there's really nothing to check. They hop in their airplane and take off. And the next thing you know, you got an F-16 flying by. And if you'll hit the slide, Bob, this is kind of what a, oh, it's a little kind of laggy, looks like on the internet there, but that's kind of what a basic intercept looks like with a headbutt. I mean, you're going to see the airplane come flying by. That's actually a headbutt pass, and we'll get to that a little later, but that's what you're going to see out the left side of your airplane. And depending on what you're flying, it's going to go by relatively slow or really, really fast. Next slide. All right. Everybody can read, so we'll just go to the next slide. It's an Air Force standard to put your learning points in there, but I'm going to talk to all of them anyway, so I don't need to read them to you. So basically, the NORAD mission, it's a biannual or binational command between the U.S. and Canada. It was established during the height of the Cold War to defend the CONUS, Alaska, Canada, and then Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands. So I feel safe down here in Puerto Rico today because I'm getting protected by NORAD. But it was basically designed to protect all those things from the Russian hordes. So next slide. But, oh, and then, yeah, sorry. I wasn't in charge of the slides, sending the slides to you. I usually delete these. Yeah.
Sorry.
Santa Claus. But, yeah. This is more for the general public than flight instructors. All right, next slide.
Well, I got a laugh out of it when I saw it.
Yeah, but then, you know, we can't cut Stan any slack because we're the military. All right, so what are we primarily interested in? It's the aerospace control portion of the mission. We also do warning and maritime warning, but the aerospace warning is more for, you know, unidentified aircraft coming into the U.S., i.e. over the poles, and missiles coming in. The portion that applies to what we're talking about today is the aerospace control, which is taking care of unauthorized activity, and national security level TFRs are deemed worth protecting with national assets, i.e. our fighters to control the airspace. So next slide. All right, so that's kind of what it looked like pre 9/11. Everything was looking out. We're looking, you know, for ICBMs and bombers coming to blow us up. Next slide. And then this is kind of what it looks like today. We're tied in with all the FAA radars. We're tied in with the Northern radars, Canadian radars. We have our own radars, and they all feed in. So we're pretty much looking at everything all the time, inside and outside. Next slide. So, you know, why do you care? I always tell people, you know, bottom line is things are as good as they're ever going to get. If anybody thinks the size of a TFR, a national security level TFR, is ever going to shrink, they haven't met the government. You know, it's basically based off the Secret Service requirements. You know, we have about 300 violations a year. That's come down from previous years. We've been doing a lot of outreach, and also I think probably the most of it has to do with, you know, new electronic aids coming out like ForeFlight, WingX Pro, and those sorts of things that really help people avoid getting in trouble. But you know, if we don't keep our act together, the Secret Service may determine that, you know, there's just too much going on and they need more space and more time. So the circle's going to get bigger. It also wastes, you know, your tax dollars and mine. You know, those are resources that we would rather spend training to a higher threat level and practicing to go to war instead of just, you know, intercepting 172s. And then, you know, the bottom line is we're not carrying fake ordnance. Everything we got on board is a live munition that we use in wartime, or, you know, if it comes right down to it and we're ordered to shoot something down, we're going to do it with a real missile or real bullets. That's never happened, and I hope to God it never does, but it's a possibility anytime anybody gets in airspace they're not supposed to be in when there's a national asset involved. And then the bottom line is, for your students mostly, is they're going to become far too familiar with the FSDO. Nobody violates a TFR and gets caught and gets away with it. They've gotten to the point where it's almost always at least a suspension of 90 days is the shortest I've heard. 180, I think, is more average, and there have been revocations in the past, and actually people have gone to jail, but that was for other things they were doing while they were violating the TFR. So next slide. So yeah, we just talked about that. Tell your students if they are going to violate the TFR, don't have a garbage bag full of weed in the back seat, because that was the guy that went to jail for like 10 to 12 years. So that was, I kind of chuckle about that. I'm like, man, what a bad day to violate the TFR. But, and like I said, it puts you and your passengers in an unsafe situation. Next slide. All right, so who are we going to intercept? We are only interested in national security level TFRs.
Mike, I'm going to interrupt for one moment. Could everybody please make sure you mute your mics? I don't want to have to do it from this end. So it just makes it easier for everybody if I don't have to do it. Thanks. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry about that.
Yep. So then anybody that enters the CIFRA or penetrates the ADIZ without doing the proper paperwork, And then there's also threats to civil aviation. So if they figure out that if they get intel that somebody slipped through the no-fly list or there's a terrorist on an airplane somewhere, we're going to go do that as well. Thing that always makes me chuckle, a couple times in the last year and a half, there has been a airliner for major companies going into LA. And if you go into LA a lot, the airspace there, sometimes you can't get a word in edgewise. Guys get annoyed that they can't talk to the controller, so they decide to squawk 7600 to get the controller's attention, and they accidentally squawk 7500. And boy, if you don't think that gets everybody's attention with a big airliner going into LA, yeah, that'll do it. So, basically it's stuff like that. It's big level stuff that we're gonna take care of. Next slide. And who do we intercept? 90% are GA pilots, and by far the most common cause is just incomplete pre-flight planning. I'm a lot nicer when I do it in the GA setting, but you're all flight instructors and know that there's a lot of people out there who do no pre-flight planning. So when I say incomplete, I really mean they don't do anything. They walk out, kick the tires, and go, yep, let's go flying today, and just don't check anything. And the next thing you know, they're in a TFR. There are some, navigation and communication failures. Those probably fall into less than 5% of the pilots that we intercept. 95+% of them just don't know it's there because they didn't do their good flight planning. All right, next slide. There's lots of reasons for a TFR. Pretty much everything other than the guy in the upper right corner of this slide is between you and the FAA. We get involved for the president, the UN General Assembly, the DNC and RNC conventions, Super Bowl, big things that have an impact on national security. Fires, air shows, sports, that's between you and the FAA. We're not going to come chase you down with an F-16 because you went through those. All right, next slide. All right, so the presidential TFR, it's active during the published times. It's almost always, we say typically published 40 hours in advance. I don't really know of any. I think when the 5 officers were shot down in Dallas, the president decided to go down there about 36 hours in advance, so that would be one case. But it's going to be the odd one out. I don't know of any that's been published less than 36 hours in advance. So, everybody says, well, it was just a pop-up TFR. That might be a fire or a law enforcement TFR, but when it comes to a national security level one, they're known far enough in advance for you to get good pre-flight planning in. If the president gets there early or decides to stay late, we still may intercept you to try to shoo you out of there. ATC is still going to try to get a hold of you to shoo you out, but you're not going to get an enforcement action from the FAA because the FAA is a legal organization more than anything, and they can only violate off of a what's legally published in the NOTAM. They're surfaced to 17999, so you're not going to be able to get under them, or if you're flying over them, you're in Class A airspace and you're under IFR control, and that's not an issue. The inner circle is typically 10, but the FAA will modify that depending on where it's at, as well as the outer circle. It's typically 3, but they'll modify that. So, when we have it in New York, a lot of times the outer circle is coincident with Class B airspace, and the inner circle, they'll make it 7 or 8 miles with a cutout for Teterboro. So, they try to accommodate traffic, and on the outer circle, if there's an airport that's, fairly busy on the outer circle, they'll make a cutout for that. So they try to accommodate as much as they can. The big thing is with Class B airspace, a lot of people confuse the two. You can underfly the Class B outer ledge, but you can't underfly the TFR. So that gets some people in trouble. All right, next slide. the keys to not getting intercepted are plan, squawk, and talk. If you do those three things, you will never, ever see us. All right, next slide. So planning, there's all kinds of places you can go. You can go to the NOTAMs. However, I will say that that bites more people than it helps. I would never, ever go to the NOTAMs just to check our check for TFRs. Most of the time, they won't even say TFR on the line. They'll just say airspace, CFDC NOTAM 78325, and I never go to the FDC NOTAMs because they're all airway NOTAMs or VORs out of service or has, you know, radials that are out between certain degrees and stuff, and I never file on Victor Airways, so I don't go look at those things. So I would find myself in the same position as everybody else if I just went to the NOTAMs to do that. And, you know, that's one thing that, you know, you as flight instructors, everybody was taught back in the day, check weather and NOTAMs before you go fly. Well, now you have to check weather, NOTAMs, and TFRs, and you just can't do that on the NOTAM page and be in the clear all the time. They're too easy to miss there. So we advocate going to the TFRFA.gov. That'll give you all the TFRs, keep you safe. If I'm just going to go, you know, take my airplane and go fly around for an hour around town, you know, just go sightsee or just, you know, go 25 or 30 miles or whatever to find the cheap gas, then I'll check the FAA website, and if it says there aren't any, that's probably good enough for me for the day. If I'm going to another, you know, if I'm going anywhere at all more than 50 miles, I always call the 1-800 weather brief because that's the gold standard for the FAA. That is your ticket out of jail. You know, if you end up violating a TFR and you've gone to 1-800 weather brief and it wasn't mentioned to you or wasn't published when you checked before you went and flew, that's all recorded, and the FAA considers that the best pre-flight planning you can do. There's actually a note on the FAA website down at the bottom that says this is not to be used for pre-flight planning. You must call 1-800 weather brief for the latest info on TFRs. And then, you know, always update your electronics. All right, next slide. So,
sorry
yeah,
about that.
The FAA, they've got a new smart search tool out there for NOTAMs. I almost use 1-800 weather brief 99% of the time, so I really haven't used this site. But you can go in there and type in where you're going to, and it'll smartly retrieve the NOTAMs for you. All right, next slide. You can't read it, but that tiny one down at the bottom, there's the list of NOTAMs for Philadelphia, and there's the one with the airspace NOTAM down at the very bottom. So good luck catching that if you're going into Philly. You'll probably get tired of reading about, you know, taxiways that are closed that you're never going to use and give up before you get down all the way down there. All right, next slide. All right, we already talked about that. Next slide. Here's what it looks like. It gives a nice state-by-state synopsis. So you just look down there. I fly around in Iowa. If I don't see Iowa, I'm pretty good, you know, fairly confident if I'm not going very far. You can also go up to the TFR map button up there that's highlighted in red. Next slide. That takes you to a graphic of the United States, and it'll show the TFRs, the big red circles or small red circles for the smaller TFRs. Next slide. You can click on those circles, and it'll be a nice picture of a sectional with the ring on there, and it'll also give you the plain text on the active times and what the TFR is predicated off of, the inner circle, outer circle, and all those good things. Next slide. And then, like I said, that's your get-out-of-jail-free card with the FAA. Next slide. All right, so a lot of people think that if there's a national security level TFR, they just can't fly that day. That's not actually true. With a few simple rules, you can operate in the TFRs legally. You have to be on a filed flight plan, whether it's IFR, VFR, doesn't matter, and that's got to be activated. You have to be squawking a discrete code, and you have to be talking to ATC. Now, you don't necessarily have to be on flight following. That implies other things to ATC. You just have to be talking to ATC and get permission to enter or leave. You can fly, you can transit it, go straight through. The big caveat with that is there's no 360s over Uncle Bob's farm to say hi to the folks. It's just a straight line through. If you're coming into land, if you're IFR, don't cancel IFR and roll over, and because you got the airport in sight. You have to maintain your squawk until your wheels are on the ground. Because if you roll over to 1200, ATC knows who you are, but we don't. And we see a 1200 squawk, and next thing you know, people are coming to get you. And if you're going to take off from an airport inside the between the inner ring and outer ring, you have to have your squawk before your wheels leave the ground. So your options there are call on a frequency, or you can call on the phone and get they'll give you a squawk and a void time, like a void clearance for an IFR. If you don't have all those three requirements met, just stay out of the TFR. The other caveat is inside the 10-mile ring, you're not going to fly. The only people that are going to fly inside the 10-mile ring are scheduled air carriers, law enforcement, and medevac. So if you're not one of those, you're not flying inside the 10-mile ring.
So I'm gonna just toss this at you then. So, say during the election, the president decides to come to the Omaha area and goes over to Council Bluffs. Basically, what you're saying, pilots at Millard aren't stuck. They can get out and fly west if they want to, or something to get out to the west. As long as they get outside the 30-mile ring.
If Millard is outside that 10-mile ring, then yes, they can call ATC, get the squawk, and they can take off into the TFR. If they're on a flight plan, they could do it so they take off part, go out, do their air work, whatever, and then they're already filed. They're talking ATC on a discrete squawk. They could come back in and land at Millard. But they can't do like pattern work at Millard. They can't do anything but take off and leave or come back in and do a full stop.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because a lot of times FBOs shut down completely because inside that 30-mile ring because they assume that they're stuck. So that's good news, actually.
Yeah, and if you actually go read the fine print of the NOTAM typically says on the first line, air operations are prohibited in this airspace. And then it defines it. But then as you read on, it says exceptions to this are on a filed active flight plan, with a discrete squawk, talking to air traffic control or cleared by air traffic control. Those are the exceptions. So with those three exceptions met, you can operate between the 10 and 30-mile rings.
Neat. Well, I learned something. I didn't know that myself.
All right, next slide. Yeah, and a lot of people don't, so that's why everybody gets angry. But I'm like, well, you don't necessarily need to be that angry. And, like I said, it's advertised a couple days ahead of time, so if you hear on the news that the president's coming to town, check where he's going, and, if you really want to fly your airplane, fly it 20 miles away, and then you can go hop in your airplane and go even when the president's there, if your airport's going to be within the 10-mile circle. The other option for TFRs is avoid it entirely. But if you're going to do that, give it a 3 to 5 mile buffer, because the violation is based off the ATC overlay, not the accuracy of your GPS. And I will tell you that ATC overlays are not always spot on. I have been told that I'm outside of the military operating area multiple times. And in fact, I've got a best GPS on the market in the F-16, and it's gotten to the point a couple times where we've actually gone and flown the lines of the MOA and had ATC adjust their overlay because they were off by 3 miles, and we got tired of getting yelled at. So, yeah, those ATC radars aren't perfect. So give it a buffer. If you decide to save that extra quarter of a gallon of gas by just skimming the outer edge, you may be 2 miles inside and not even know it. All right, next slide. All right, yeah, know your lost comm procedures. If you're lost comm, don't enter the TFR. If I was filing IFR to an airport that was inside a TFR, I would always have an alternate listed, no matter what the weather was. So if I went lost comm, I could go to my alternate because I'm not going inside a TFR without a radio. If you're already inside the TFR, squawk 7600. It's important your students know the squawk codes and don't squawk the wrong thing, or they could compound the problem. If you're IFR, go ahead and follow your lost comm procedures if you're already inside the TFR, and if you're VFR, exit in the shortest direction. All right, next slide. All right, iDevices, make sure they're up to date. Your information is only as good as your last download, so if you thought you updated your iPad, 20 minutes before you left, but in reality, the last time it updated 2 days ago because of an error in the connection with your internet, well, you've got data from 2 days ago, and that's not really going to help you out. Make sure it's set up correctly to display the TFRs. Most programs out there will display them, but there's settings that can accidentally get switched, so they won't. And if you're flying along thinking your TFRs are getting displayed when you in fact accidentally hit some button and now they're not, that can get you in trouble as well. All right, next slide. All right, the gotchas. You want to recheck your TFRs for each leg. The checking once in the morning for your entire day of flying's not going to get you out of trouble with the FAA. So each flight is its own separate entity. So make sure you're doing all your required pre-flight planning for each leg. Departing from VFR airport outside or in the outer circle, stop. You gotta call ATC and make sure you got that squawk before your wheels leave the ground. And then, if you're out camping for a week in the boonies, the good thing is the president doesn't really go to places that are out in the boonies. But give somebody a call and ask for an update once you get airborne and start getting closer to civilization. And anybody, ATC or flight service can give you an update and let you know if your flight path is clear. All right, next slide. All right. I don't know, Bob, if you want to do questions about TFRs now or wait till the end for all the questions. However you normally do it or want to do it, that's fine with me.
Well, if anybody's got any questions, this is a great opportunity for you. I think you're doing a great job. I think the best thing you answered is the 30-mile ring. I feel really stupid not knowing that. I'm going to be honest with you.
Well, until I got this job, I probably would have flown through a TFR on my 182 if I would have had it before I started this job, because even sitting on alert, I always assumed that the NOTAMs covered everything, so I check weather and NOTAMs religiously. But like I said, the NOTAMs just do such a bad job that it gets a lot of people in trouble. They check the NOTAMs, but unless they go to those FTC NOTAMs, they're not going to know. So teach your students to go to one of the TFR resources and check them specifically. All right, on to intercept procedures. Next slide. All right, first off, everybody, the number one question is, well, what are you going to do if I put my flaps out in my Cub and slow down to 40 knots? I'm not even going to try to slow down as much as a light GA airplane. But the government provides the $30 million fighter with just all kinds of really cool toys that you're probably not going to get away from. We've got so much information coming into the airplane from sensors on the ground, other sensors in the air. We can get feeds from other radars that are airborne, other airplanes, the other airplane in our flight. We've got targeting pods that can track infrared. We've got our eyeballs. So don't try to get away from us. That kind of turned into one of the most exciting days of my life, and we'll probably talk about it here in a little bit. Our jet will fly as low as your airplane. I mean, there's the same rules of physics apply. We're just going a little faster. And then, you know, don't try to land and run away, because we practice tracking people all over the place. We're not going to leave unless, you know, told by higher headquarters. If we tell you to land somewhere, just land there and wait, because if you try to run and hide in a hangar or something like that, or hop in a car and split, you know, we're going to tell the cops where you went. All right, next slide. All right. Our intercept procedures come right out of the ICAO. They're in the AIM 562, but the AIM does a horrible job, and I wish they would let us rewrite them so they could actually be understood by the common pilot. But like I said, the FAA is a complete legal organization, and we have no say in that, so we're going to tell you what's really going to happen here in this little presentation. All right, next slide. First off, ATC is going to try to attempt radio contact on the assigned frequency for the area you're in. They're also going to try to go to 121.5 and make a call. It really only works if you know where you're at, because the call is going to sound something like aircraft, you know, 35 miles southwest of Grand Rapids VOR heading, you know, 120 at 3,500 feet. You're about to enter restricted airspace. Turn south, you know, or I guess south probably wouldn't be good, but, you know, turn east immediately to avoid that. And so if you're listening up and you got an idea where you're at, you can probably keep yourself out of trouble that way. All right, next slide. If that doesn't work, we're going to scramble interceptors. There's two kinds of intercept postures we'll take. One is ground intercept. So that's obviously pilots sitting on alert in an alert shack, and when the klaxon goes off, we run out to the airplane, hop in, and we're gone in a matter of minutes. And it's usually, we got a little bit longer, but it's usually in the single digits, so it's not a long time. Or for places where we know there's going to be a lot of violators, typically Southern California and Florida, we'll just have airplanes airborne hanging out inside the TFR in the block, like 12 to 14,000, something like that. So as people come in and violate the TFR, we just, you know, swoop down 10,000 feet and we're there in 30 seconds. And there's almost always two aircraft involved in the intercept. You're probably only going to see one of them at a time. All right, next slide. The initial intercept is going to be one fighter coming down the left side of your aircraft, rocking its wings, kind of getting an overall feel of what kind of airplane you are. We have a format that we report back to headquarters on tail number and type of airplane or general characteristics of the airplane. Bob, you can hit the video. I will tell you, with these videos, well, these are kind of glitchy, but they're shot with a wide-angle lens. GoPros have a wide-angle lens, so that airplane looks a lot further away than it's going to look if you're sitting in your, you know, 172. If you're in your 172, we're going to come by about 100 feet off your wing tip, and it's going to look a lot closer than anything you're used to. But we do practice on a regular basis, and, you know, it's something we fly around with 3 feet wingtip separation, so as long as you don't do anything to kind of catch us off guard, like try to do a hard turn into us or something like that, you're perfectly safe. We're not going to hit you. Just keep going. All right, next slide.
Okay.
What's going to intercept you out there? We've got 5 bases that have F-15s. They're kind of the 4 corners of the U.S. and then the Gulf of Mexico. So that's where we got the F-15s. They're more for the long-range kind of Russian threat, but they are on alert and they will intercept, you know, for a presidential TFR or any other kind of national security TFR if called upon. Most likely, you'll probably see an F-16. That's the vast majority of the alert bases that are out there these days. If you're up in Canada, you could get intercepted by a CF-18. But if you do that, you've really made them mad, because I think they've only had one. They call it security airspace. They've only had one security airspace, and that was for the Vancouver Olympics that I know of, and that was a while ago. So if you get intercepted by one of them, you've really done something to make the Canadians mad. And then if you happen to be up in Alaska, you'll probably get intercepted by an F-22. And unlike the F-15 and F-16 that are just going to go zipping past you, he's going to pull up alongside you and park there. So that's going to be a real treat, at least for the few seconds that you get to experience it until you talk to the FSDO. All right, next slide. If you're intercepted, what your students need to know is the big thing is remain predictable. Maintain your altitude. If you start to descend, what does that look like to us? Well, things that we're protecting with the national security level TFR are always on the ground. So if you start descending, it looks like to us you're going into attack mode. So that's a bad thing to do. Don't change your heading because another airplane may be coming up to do the second pass, or we may going to be repositioned to do another pass. But yeah, just keep doing what you're doing until we tell you to do something different. So this is kind of like the poster boy for not being predictable. The second intercept I did was on a float plane. The president happened to be in Milwaukee. The float plane was coming across the lake, violated the TFR. He was doing about 80 knots, and I went zipping by at 200. So I wasn't able to get his full tail number the first pass. So I made a second pass, and I happened to be single ship at that time because there were two violators, and my wingman was off dealing with the first guy who was arguing with us about where he was going to land. So I was by myself. So I peel back around, do a second pass to finish getting his tail number. And after I do that, he basically is about 1,500 feet. He almost does what I consider a split S. It was very aggressive for the little float plane he was in. Got to about 50 feet over the water and started doing like S-turns and stuff trying to lose me. And then he turned and headed right for downtown Milwaukee. And I did 4 headbutts, that was that very first video you saw with the flares coming out, where we fly down the side rocking our wings, but this time instead of 200 knots, I'm at 400 knots, and I do a hard turn across his nose. He's at 50 feet, I'm at 100 feet, headbutting him, trying to get him to turn around and not fly over downtown Milwaukee. And I was getting very, very nervous. I thought, unlucky me, I'm going to be the first guy that actually has to do something against this guy. Thank God, approach found him on some frequency and told him that he better, head north right now because things are starting to get serious. So he heads north. They give me his frequency. I call him up and I say, okay, you're directed to land here. And he says, well, I can't land there because I'm float only. I got to land in water. Okay, stand by. I'm going to talk to higher headquarters, figure out what they want to do with you. So I call him back about a minute and a half later. I get no response. Next thing I know, he turns and starts heading towards land again. And I'm like, oh, my God, what's going on now? And then he landed on the lake, and come to find out, he said he was having navigation problems and all kinds of other issues. And, so I gave him a number to call the Secret Service at, and he didn't have a pen to write with, and he was just having a bad day. But I really think the thing that saved him was I was able to complete getting his tail number, and within 30 seconds of me getting his tail number, they were actually on the phone with his wife, to see if the airplane was stolen, what was going on, and she said, no, it's actually my husband, and he's not a terrorist. He's just not a very good pilot, so please don't shoot him down. I think that's what kind of saved the guy and saved me. But, he was in a position where, he was just going to have a bad day, and it got to the point where he could have had the worst day he could possibly imagine. If they hadn't have gotten a hold of his wife, it could have gone really south for the guy. So the remain predictable one, that's a no kidding. You want to do that. So when you get intercepted, acknowledge with a ring rock to let us know that you see us, and you know you've been intercepted. And then try calling us on 121.5. If you can talk to us, it's going to get a lot easier because we're just going to ask you to, you know, just tell you what you need to do, and then we're just going to hang out, kind of overhead verify it. There's not going to be any more close passes. If we need to finish getting your tail number, we may tell you we're going to make another pass to verify the tail number you gave us so you didn't accidentally misspeak a letter or whatever. But yeah, that's basically what's going to happen. All right, next slide. So you can hit the button again. Hopefully the video is a little better. This is the follow me. So the fighter is going to come by, pass on the left side, just like you did on the initial intercept, but now it's going to be a nice 30-degree bank turn to a heading, and he's going to hold that heading for probably about 30 seconds before he has to reposition. When we do an intercept, air traffic control gives us a limited amount of airspace around the target we're intercepting, and that airspace follows the target. So I can't drive for 2 minutes out in front of you, or I'll be outside of the airspace. But the big difference, what I tell people between the basic, you've been intercepted and I'm going to reposition for another look. If you can do with your airplane what I'm doing with my airplane, then you do with your airplane what I'm doing. So if I do a nice easy turn to a heading and roll out, I want you to turn to that heading. If I go flying by and I do a hard climbing turn with the burner cooking, and you go, there's no way my airplane can keep up with that, then that's not a follow me. That's just I have to reposition because I need to stay within the airspace. All right, next slide. The headbutt is you're getting a little too close. You've progressed further inside the TFR, and we want you to turn right now. This may be the first thing you see. The airplane's going to fly down, rock his wings, and then he's going to turn hard in front of your nose, a 90-degree turn, and you want to turn your airplane in that direction. I will say with the guide or the follow me, if I want you to do a left-hand turn, I'm going to fly down the left-hand side of your airplane and do that nice 30-degree bank turn to the left and roll out on a heading. If I want you to turn right, I'll fly down the right side of your airplane and do a nice 30-degree bank turn. I will not cross your nose on a follow me or a guide. But a headbutt, things have progressed to the point where we want you out of there now. So I'm going to come by. I'm not going to be at 200 knots. I'm probably going to be 350 to 400 knots because I got to have some smash on the airplane to maneuver it, and it's going to be a 90 degrees bank turn right, out about 1,000 feet in front of your nose, and then you turn in that direction. You can play the video. The plane's not going quite 350 to 400 for the video because we want people to be able to see the video and kind of see what's going on. But like I said, it's going to seem a lot closer and a lot faster if you see it in real life. All right, next slide. All right. If we give you a guide, we get you on a heading, we get you to an airport where we want you to land, we're going to lower the gear, pass you on the left-hand side, rocking our wings with the gear down. You should look down in front of the nose and you should see an airport. And when you do that, you're cleared to land on pretty much, if you don't have comm, you just pick the runway you want to land on and land on it. We've cleared everything out with ATC, or we've cleared everything out on the CTAF frequency. So if it's a towered airport, they know you're coming and they're expecting you. If it's CTAF, we're going to try to clear everybody out and say, hey, there's an active air intercept coming to this airport. If you're in the vicinity, land or leave. And then if we want you to land on a specific runway, we'll go out and fly up that runway with our gear down, but typically we're not going to care. All right, next slide. All right, so post-intercept, it's all up to the Secret Service. There's lots of variables. If you get intercepted and, you're out in Southern California and there's, 50-some violators in the day and a half that the TFR is active, we're probably not going to follow everybody to where they're going to land. We're just going to get your tail number, tell you to call the Secret Service at some number, or just let the FAA track you down. So those decisions are made at a level well above ours. The intercepts that I've done, the pilots have been directed to land at an airport, and then we followed up from there. You're going to be met by anywhere from 1 to 5 enforcement agencies, because if you're the only game in town, it's like every firefighter wants to show up at the only fire. You're the entertainment for the day. The local cops will probably be the first ones there, followed by the Secret Service, DEA, ATF, you name it. If it's got a 3-letter identifier for a government agency, they might show up. If nobody's there, just hang out. They will be there, and we're going to hang out until they get there. All right, next slide. All right, any questions on intercepts?
I'm going to jump in here. There was one question from Derek, going back to TFRs for just a moment.
Yeah.
He said at KMVY, I'm not sure what identifier that is. He thinks that there's published rules to operate inside that. Do you know anything about that?
Published
Martha's
rules
Vineyard.
Inside. Yeah, if you go to the TFR, the actual verbiage for the TFR, the NOTAM, the FDC NOTAM, it will say, operations are prohibited at first, and then later on it'll give the exceptions. So yeah, it gives you the exceptions for operating inside the TFR. Like I said, inside the 10-mile circle, it's only scheduled air carrier, law enforcement, or medevac, life flight. And then between the 10 and 30, it spells out the rules, which we talked about, which are the active flight plan, squawk, discrete squawk, talking to ATC, to operate between the 10 and 30. But yes, they are all spelled out in detail in the actual FDC NOTAM.
Okay. So as always, get a good brief and read the NOTAM. Any questions on intercepts from anybody? Wow, you're doing a great job. Nobody's jumping in here. The interesting thing is the predictability. That's a great point. I'm sure you guys are already fairly keyed up with everything that's going with whatever's going on. Then having somebody do something strange probably doesn't make you feel any better.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you're unpredictable, you're just making it harder on yourself. I mean, because as far as I'm concerned, once I get you out of the defended airspace, I'm going to do whatever higher headquarters says. If they say, hey, have them call this number and you're free to go, I'm going to go back and finish my lunch, or finish watching whatever movie I was watching. But, if you start doing things that are unpredictable and cause me to work harder, those get relayed up to, headquarters, which the Secret Service rep is there. I mean, the Secret Service and everybody else knows if you're being difficult. And if you're being difficult, they're going to look at you with a much harsher eye, including the FAA. So, yeah, if you're predictable and you're nice and polite and just do what you're asked and leave, then that's about as easy as you can make it on yourself. Anything beyond that, anything you do that goes outside those bounds, you're just making it more difficult on yourself. So, and I hope you're right that I'm doing an okay job. Otherwise, because in this format, I can't tell if everybody's asleep or I can't tell what's going on.
I think they're all here, and I think they're all listening. Derek just asked, are intercepts ever done with helicopters?
Yeah, we'll get to those. That's actually in the next set of slides. So
okay, great. Here we go.
Go to the next slide. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the CIFRA. 30 miles off the DCA VOR up to 18,000. And it's got certain procedures that go with it, the two-way radio, discrete codes. You got to have a special flight plan, and there's airspeed restrictions. Next slide. And you can find out all about that, because if you're going to fly within 60 miles of the DCA VOR, you are required to go to FAAsafety.gov and take the CIFRA course. And at the end of the course, there's a certificate of achievement that you have to print out and carry with you if you're going to fly within 60 miles of the DCA VOR. So that is a requirement to fly within 60 miles of the DCA VOR. Next slide. And here's our helicopter. Violations in the CIFRA, they've actually come down a lot, but they used to be so numerous that it just didn't make sense to take off F-16s every time there was a CIFRA violator, because some days they couldn't keep the airplanes gassed up and turned. I mean, it takes a finite amount of time once we land to get the airplane turned around to be ready to go again. So they got with the Coast Guard and came up with a helicopter to do intercepts on low slow inside the CIFRA. I will say, I guess there would be a possibility of you getting intercepted by a helicopter in a national security level TFR, because the Secret Service has a couple of those that they use in conjunction with other people and stuff like that. But those are outside of our control, and that's usually going to be if you make it inside, well inside the 10-mile circle, or if you took off from an airport inside the 10-mile circle and they just happen to be airborne patrolling, you know, then that could be, you know, a situation where a helicopter would be there. But typically the only helicopter that we use is in the CIFRA, and it's a Coast Guard helicopter. And it's actually got a little lighted banner there that they can show you, or, you know, they can communicate you with. As far as the helicopter intercept goes, I don't know how they do it. They might come from head on and just pivot around, or from below or above. I don't know how they do their stuff, but it'll be pretty obvious when the helicopter's off your wing. All right, you can click on the video and it'll play the scrolling banner. So, yeah, like I said, it's a little jerky, but there's all kinds of pre-programmed stuff that they just hit a button and it tells you all kinds of little messages. All right, next slide. All right, DC has a visual warning system. It works really great at night. I think it works so-so in the daytime. If you see the red and green ice, it is an eye-safe laser, so you're not going to get your eyeballs burned out. But if you see it, turn around and go the other way. Contact ATC. Once again, if you're IFR and you're just NORAD, comply with your flight plan route. But yeah, there's a couple videos. One's day, one's night, and you'll be able to see the difference. So obviously that's night, and that would get your attention. So you can see that's daytime, and I might or might not notice that. All right, next slide. The other area we're concerned with is the ADIZ. I don't know if any of your instructors down in Florida. A lot of traffic between the Bahamas and the U.S. And if you don't do it right, you get an escort, just like a national security level TFR. You got to file an IFR or a DVFR flight plan. The D stands for Defense VFR flight plan, to let us know that you're going to be transiting the ADIZ. You got to activate it. So obviously, it doesn't do any good if it's in the system and it doesn't get activated. Got to be in two-way radio contact, and you got to give them a 15-minute heads up, and they'll give you a discrete code before you penetrate the ADIZ. All right, next slide. Okay, so other airspace. This is a snapshot from the Nellis range. not all airspace military is this busy, but I have been in wars out at Nellis with 80-plus airplanes in them, and they're going every which way, and it gets kind of crazy. And the vast majority of the airspace out there is a MOA, so you know you can go to the next slide. You know, you're perfectly legal. It's your God-given right as an American to go fly into a MOA whenever you want, as long as you can maintain VFR cloud clearance.
I've been on this thing on a telephone connection to listen to them.
I would always encourage your students to at least check with the controlling agency and see if the MOA is hot. And if it is hot, just let them know that you're going to go zipping through there, because most of my close calls with civilian aircraft have been in MOAs. When we're in MOAs, we're doing that's kind of where we practice fighting the Russian hordes or the Chinese or whatever we happen to be practicing for that day. But it'll be, you know, 4 good guy airplanes fighting 2, 4, 6, 8 bad guy airplanes, and airplanes are going every which direction. We're, you know, zipping towards each other at 0.98 Mach, so we're closing at 20 miles a minute. And I'm directing people's radars, and I'm watching stuff from ground feeds, and I'm directing tactics. And even when I'm going out, you know, I'm watching what's going on behind me. So the one thing I'm not doing a lot of is looking out my window for other airplanes that happen to be in the airspace. So I always encourage people, you know, find out if it's hot, and if it is, avoid it if you can. If you can't, at least tell the controlling agency that you're going to go zipping through there. We're usually monitoring a discrete freak that they can get a hold of us on, and we'll modify our fight, or we'll just cancel it entirely, you know, and then in the name of safety, because I have probably come within a few hundred feet of you know, civilian airplanes buzzing around in there. Restricted airspace. Hopefully, you know, everybody knows about restricted airspace. You can't go through it unless ATC clears you. That's where, you know, things fall off our airplanes and hit the ground. They may be, you know, full of concrete and not go boom, or they may be full of tritonol and make a big explosion, but it's not where you want to be. Prohibited areas, I won't insult your intelligence with those. You know, alert areas, no restrictions with those. It's just high concentrations of student training, probably not areas you want to hang out in. Warning areas, they would be restricted areas, but they're out over international airspace, so we can't call them restricted areas. But the same sorts of thing happens in there that happens in MOAs and restricted areas, to include live missile firing and gun firing and stuff like that. So probably want to check and see if they're hot before you go transiting through there. And then the VR routes, I tell people, you know, those are just on maps for advisory purposes, because they're only hot for, you know, 30 seconds at a time for any given section of them. They're hundreds of miles long. That's where we do our low altitude training. We're typically doing between 480 and 520, and we're down around 500 to 1,000 feet. So the key is, if you're going to cross them, try to do it perpendicular, and then try to be above about 2,500 AGL. And if you do that, they're really not going to be a factor for you, because we're going to be down low. So the FAA does have a site, sua.faa.gov, Special Use Airspace is what it stands for. And it'll tell you what's currently scheduled, and I think also what's pending. There's a color code for that. Just realize that we can schedule military airspace up to 2 hours in advance. The FAA requires at least a 2-hour advance to publish the NOTAM. So if you're going on a 4-hour flight, you know, if you check it 30 minutes before takeoff, you're good for the first hour and a half. If you're going to be going through any military airspace after that first hour and a half, you know, go ahead and try to get a hold of the controlling agency to see if it's gone hot. All right, next slide. That's kind of they're improving the site. You can kind of select what you want. they're going to put TFRs on this site in the future. So just have to kind of play with the site and see what you like. All right, next slide. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah. You know, we always tell people, if you don't remember anything else, plan, squawk, and talk to ATC, and if you're doing those things, you'll ever have any experiences with us. All right, next slide.
Yep, my fault. Came off the screen. There we go.
All right, that's it.
Okay, well, the mics are all open. If anybody has any questions for Mike. No questions at all? Well, Mike, you did a great job.
Yeah, like I said, either that or everybody's asleep.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Well,
not asleep.
I really appreciate this. This is well, you just got a good job from Derek. This is yeah, it's a bit dry, but we're coming into political season. The Secret Service is going to request TFRs for these folks. I get to the point sometimes where I just say, just stay in D.C. and campaign from an office. It's the age of the internet, but they're going to be out wandering around chasing votes.
Well, now I will tell you, Bob, that's kind of a misconception. We don't even enforce the vice president's TFR.
True.
With fighters. That's just it's for the president only. The candidates, they may set up a small, like, vice president type of TFR when they get to a certain point, but you're not going to be dealing with NORAD. You're just going to be dealing with the FAA on that.
Okay. Well, still, nobody wants to deal with the FAA except in a positive way. So.
Yeah, no, and if you do the things we talked about, even the small TFRs out there, you know, the little ones, you're not going to get in trouble with, because you're going to know they're there and you're going to just avoid them.
Yep.
And like I said, if you do the 1-800 weather brief, even if there's a law enforcement action going on, like you're flying over, I don't know, Chicago or something like that, and there's a law enforcement one that they decide to put up. If you've done the 1-800 weather brief thing and you gave them your route of flight and they tell you that there's nothing there, you may get a call from the FAA and said, hey, what were you doing in the TFR? And you say, well, I got 1-800 weather brief and they never said anything about it. And the FAA is going to say, okay, thanks, sorry to bother you. If you didn't do that, well, you're going to be in the office.
So, and for all the instructors here and for myself, the only time I want to be in the FAA office is if I'm getting something renewed or if they're giving me an award. So,
yeah.
As much as I like the FAA, I want to keep it that way. Let's put it that way, and I'm sure all of you do. So, Mike, I really appreciate it. You did this. I assume you're on an overnight with your employer down there, or are you on vacation?
No, I'm on a trip.
Well, I really appreciate you taking your rest time to do this. It's very nice of you. What do you fly when you're not flying on our tax dollars or on our ticket fares? What do you usually fly?
Oh, I've got a 182.
Okay.
Go bopping around in.
I have to wander. I'm close enough to Des Moines. I got to wander over your way one of these days.
Yeah.
So.
Although I did learn a lesson. If you fly through moderate precipitation long enough, you have to repaint your prop. So I just had to take my son to back to school on Monday, and luckily that big monsoon thing that was hanging out over Louisiana had it pretty much moderate rain all the way to the Great Lakes. So
yeah, that'll do it.
I went as far as I could, and so that's my expensive hobby.
And someday I'll find out, and maybe somebody here smarter than me will explain it. Why do 182s howl when you're in the clouds. I've never understood that. The minute they get wet, they make a funny, odd noise.
They do, and it freaked my wife out.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that. She was like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "It's going to be fine."
Well, again, Mike, really appreciate it. So,
All right. Thanks, Bob.
So for next month, we'll be having our webinar on the third Wednesday, and if I can look at the calendar quickly enough, that would be the I can count too. I'm a flight instructor. That would be on the 21st of September, same time. It'll be Mike Adams from Avemco, and he'll be talking to us about what they've seen, the claims they've seen come through, and how helping flight instructors help students avoid those claims, and also how flight instructors can avoid claims themselves. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time. Fly safe, be safe, have a good rest of the summer, and like the song says, we'll see you in September.
All right, Bob, I'd just like to thank everybody for participating tonight. You know, just one last thing for flight instructors: if you can teach people right from the beginning, they'll never have an issue. And if they're not taught right from the beginning, they'll struggle the whole time trying to get the good habit patterns.
You're absolutely right. Nothing like untraining a habit.
Yep.
All right, everybody. Be safe. Bye-bye.